Hey everybody, it's me, Pete. Sorry I can't be with you today in the flesh. Lynn and I are traveling back to Kansas, where we'll be for about a week, helping out with the family. Lynn's mom's having some health struggles, and so we want to do our part as family to support. A lot of folks, we have a lot of family there already that's been doing a lot, but we want to do our part, and of course we want to see them. So we'll be back next Sunday and look forward to being with you then. We continue the series Life After God, based on the book by Mark Feldmeyer. And in the chapters that we're looking at today, which would be 5 and 6, he's talking about, he's titled these Hum and Bzzz. And they're very interesting chapters, very provocative. And there are some things that I really want to speak into on this. And so that's why I wanted to pre-record rather than go in a different direction today. So first I'm going to start with a story. And this could be one of those roll your eyes stories that at the end of the story you might be saying, oh, give me a break. And maybe the last thing that you ever hear me say, because you're just like, I'm out of here, man. I can't believe this clown, even thinks that or says that. And that's fine. That's your prerogative. But I hope you'll hear the heart behind the story because it's a meaningful one to me and my family. Many years ago now, my daughter had been making it known for a long time that she wanted a lap dog. We had a really big dog. His name was Chico. At his heaviest, he was around 120 pounds. We started cutting back on the beef jerky treats to help him slim down so he'd get along a little bit better. And he settled in right about 100 pounds. He was a big boy, and he was great. He was as gentle as could be, wonderful with the kids, protective of the kids. It was amazing. But Lake and my daughter, she really dreamed of having a little dog that would, cuddle up on her lap and she could pet and dress up and, all those fun things. And so it came about where Trudy Boucher, who's a crosswalker and has done a lot of dog rescue, particularly with dachshunds, she got a bunch of pups. And she invited us to come take a look at these Chiweenies, which are part dachshund, part Chihuahua, and who knows what else, kind of mutts, but they definitely had dachshund in them. And so we fell in love with this little dog called Hans. And we saw the dog, and we're going to go away on a quick trip to Disneyland. And so while we're at Disneyland, we're talking the whole way down. While we're at Disneyland and the whole way back up, should we get this dog or should we not get this dog? Trudy was kind enough to hide that dog when other people would come because it was so darn cute. And we knew that if anybody else saw this little dog, he'd be gone by the time we'd get back. Well, Lynn was the one person, the lone voice that was adamantly opposed to getting this dog because she thought that the burden of responsibility in terms of the care, feeding, etc. would all be on her while the kids are at school, I'm up at the office, whatnot. Love prevailed. And so this little sweet dog came home with us under a few conditions. One is that I would take this little dog up to the office to be with me so she wouldn't have to deal with the potty training and all that, which I did. This was before we had a, no dog policy kind of thing at the church. Not that a puppy would do a whole lot, but I dutifully took the dog out and did his business. And when I held my noon group, a lot of people got cuddle time, and there was some of the warmest, most wonderful, loving sessions we had because everybody got to pet this little puppy. And that puppy smell, they just smell so good and they're so sweet. So that was a sweet time. But a fascinating thing happened. In short order, this little dog, who we renamed Banjo, if I didn't say that already, he figured out who he needed to win over in the family. And of course, it was Lynn. And so before you know it, Lynn, who was kind of the holdout on this thing, I'm not even sure I don't want a dog, this is a bad idea. Before you know it, Banjo was on her lap, following her around, and he became her dog. And they had this relationship which was amazing. And she absolutely fell head over heels in love with our little Banjo. We would take him to the coast. We would drive him around. That's the benefit of little lap dogs. You can take him everywhere. And we loved this little guy. Unfortunately, when I was in Africa in 2014, I got a call, or actually when I talked to Lynn one night after we were done with our trip stuff, she let me know that something was going on with Banjo, and we weren't quite sure what. He was just acting really weird and having trouble walking, kind of acting like he was drunk. And so they took him into to the vet, and they didn't know what was going on. They recommended taking him to UC Davis, which has, literally one of the world's best veterinary hospitals in the world. So we took him there and found out that he had an autoimmune central nervous system disease of some kind. And if we did treatment for him, we might get a year. And there were some other things they wanted to do, which, we've kind of learned that there are some things that maybe vets want to do but aren't really necessary. They're not really going to help an outcome at all. They may be informative, but on our dime, if it's not going to really benefit the dog any or whatnot, then it's probably not worth it. So we passed on some things we could, but long and the short of it was to keep Banjo alive, we would have to go up to UC Davis 2 times a month, back-to-back days, morning and evening, so he could get this shot, which was a cancer treatment, but it had this other benefit where it would keep the inflammation around his central nervous system down so that he continued to function, and it worked. And the beautiful thing is we got more than 1 year out of it. We got about 5 years with Banjo. And we found out that was really, really rare. But, we had a commitment that we made to ourselves and really to Banjo that we wanted to make sure his quality of life was good. And when it came time where he could no longer be a dog, and get around and enjoy his life, we didn't want to keep him around just for our benefit because it was hard to let go. We'd seen that happen before. We had a friend that kept their dog around, to the point of the dog suffering for a long time because it was so difficult for him to let go. And we didn't want that for Banjo. It was an act of love to say that. And so anyway, as a family, we went up to UC Davis one last time and had a special room for us. And of course, the staff knew him really well, and they loved him. They looked forward to seeing him a couple times a month. And we said our goodbyes, and as I remember, I was left alone with the doctor and Banjo, and I'm holding him, and the doctor gives him, the injections that are first going to put him to sleep, like unconscious, and then finally to stop his heart. And I'm holding him, and I can feel his heart stop. And it's like my heart stopped at the same time. And, the reality is I've experienced plenty of death from important people in my life, grandparents, dear friends, all the way back to high school to here in Napa, wonderful people. But for some reason that I can't fully explain, and I'm not quite sure how I feel about it either because it's a dog, this was one of the most difficult levels of sorrow and pain and grief I have ever experienced. It shocked me. It leveled me. I remember going out and Len and the kids were waiting for me, and we just kind of huddled in a mess of tears and sobbing and tried to take a walk. They've got some beautiful walking areas around UC Davis, and I just remember going into a bathroom for a second, not because I had to go to the bathroom, but because I was a mess, and I just lost it. And I just lost it, just sobbing, kind of uncontrollably. It was terrible. And the morning, just it lingers and stays, and got home, and of course there's no Banjo anymore to greet us. There's just such a horrible absence when we got home. So we were just kind of in a funk, as you can imagine, and we went out to our patio and just sat down together, just not really saying much. And as we're there, just sort of being together, supporting each other, we never noticed this before, but this white moth just sort of flittered by. It hung out in our backyard for a little while and just sort of took off and just kind of playing with the wind and was there and then was gone. And we didn't really think a lot of it, didn't mean a lot to us. But over the next several days and beyond, we just noticed that when we were especially down, that white moth would keep showing up at kind of just the right time. And so we associated meaning to this white moth. And I don't know how everything works. I don't know how everything works, but it just sure seemed like every time we were in the dumps, this little white moth would just show up. And we ascribed to it a meaning of love is still around. Love continues. So much so that anytime we saw it, we just thought about the love of our little dog. And so anytime we'd see a white moth flying around, we'd say, oh, it's Banjo. Banjo's back, because we experienced so much of this love from Banjo. That's the part where you might think I'm just nuts. And that's fine. I know Banjo is not a moth, and I don't understand how everything's connected. But what I can tell you is that we experienced that as a real gift, and it was deeply meaningful to us. And even still, every time I see a white moth in our backyard, it just warms my heart. I'm not grieving to the level, but I still remember it. And anytime I remember it too much, I remember the pain. And even if I'm up at church in the courtyard or something, and sometimes even on Sunday morning when we've had services out there, I'll see a white moth floating around. And it's just the reminder, kind of like, in the New Testament, you have this white dove descends on Jesus and shows up at Pentecost. And it's sort of like this sign of the presence of God. And that's kind of what I've ascribed it to. Is it the presence of God? Maybe. Yes. No. Who cares? For me, I see this, I experience this, and I'm reminded when I see this of love showing up when I really needed it, because I was going through such difficulty. This is the kind of thing we're talking about today, is what happens. How do we understand this presence, this hum of God? And Feldmeyer does a good job in this particular chapter 5, talking about the Spirit of God. Again, we've kind of been building, there are overlaying themes week to week. And he talks about how in the very first verses of the Bible, you get the Hebrew word ruach, which is the Hebrew word for Spirit, the Holy Spirit. And if you've been around Crosswalk long at all, you've heard us say that the word for wind, breath, and spirit are all the same. So ruach is this wind, breath, spirit statement that shows up again and again and again throughout the Hebrew scriptures. And then in the New Testament, which was written in Greek, the word changes. So the word is pneuma, and it shows up hundreds and hundreds of times. So, between the two words showing up in each testament, it's like over 800 times this word shows up. So this is not a small thing. The Spirit of God, the wind of God, the breath of God keeps showing up. It is the thing that is hovering over the waters of chaos at the beginning of creation and breathes in life to everything as it unfolds. That's how it shows up in the first few verses of the Bible. This is a very potent, powerful thing we're talking about here, this movement of God, this work of the Spirit. Later on, I'll give you some stories, because it shows up in some really powerful ways. One way it shows up, you've heard the story about the Exodus and the whole 10 Commandments. You saw the movie. Well, you remember one of the dramatic scenes, which was a cinematic marvel, was the sea is parted. Now, there's some biblical problem. Well, lots of biblical interpretation problems here. One is, did this thing actually happen? Well, who knows? This could be, imagined history to make a point about God's power and ability to help out, in times of trouble. There's problems with the language. Was it the Red Sea or the Sea of Reeds? That causes problems. That makes the miracle very, very different. But let that go. Because what we have here is a story, and I think that's the most important way to look at it, is look at the thing as metaphor and draw the meaning from it. And what happens is Moses is invited to hold up his staff, and God is going to do God's thing. And what happens? Moses holds up the staff, and the wind starts to blow and blow and blow and part the waters and keeps blowing, so that the land underneath the former sea becomes dry enough for the Israelites to pass through, get all the way across the sea, And then the Egyptian army follows in, and as soon as the last Israelite is out, Moses lowers his staff. The wind apparently stops. The waves come crashing down, and Israel is safe. Bummer for the Egyptian army, but Israel is safe, and that's what we're supposed to focus on. The enemies have been taken care of. Israel is moving toward the promised land. And all that journey, for 40 days, 40 years, in the desert, you had a cloud by day and a fire by night. Those were the images of God. Well, what's a cloud? Cloud shows you that the wind is moving. That's how you know there's wind, other than trees and whatnot. It's the evidence of God is what we're seeing here. This is the wind. This is the breath. This is the Spirit of God at work. Later on, in one of the prophet books, or actually before that, these two kind of coalesce a little bit. You had a guy named Elijah who was the most beloved prophet in ancient Israel. And he's terrified for his life. He just had a showdown with the prophets of Baal, and he really ticked off the queen Jezebel, who now has a price on his head. And so instead of standing in courage, realizing what God had just done, for the showdown, he runs as fast as he can to, the greatest holy place in Israel's history, at the top of the mountain where the very 10 Commandments were given to Moses. He thinks, all right, well, if God is going to show up anywhere, he's going to show up on that mountain. So he beelines it there, goes up to the top of the mountain, and waits to have an audience and a conversation with God. All kinds of crazy things happen while he's on top of that mountain. There's lightning, there's thunder, there's massive winds. But the story goes that in all of those things, God could not be found. And finally, while he's kind of hiding in a cave, we imagine, he experiences God inviting him out one more time. And Elijah goes out one more time, and it's in the sound of silence that God speaks to him. The sound of silence. It's like you kind of wonder, is the only thing that Elijah can hear at that point is his own breath. Kind of makes you wonder if this meditation thing and focusing on our breath maybe has a lot of merit. And maybe when we breathe, we're doing more than just doing this physical thing of breathing. But could it be that there's some transaction happening with the very Spirit of God, in whom, as Paul said later on, in whom we live and move and have our being? Somewhere within a few hundred years of this event, the prophet Ezekiel has this vision, and he's invited to go in this vision. It's all imagination, it's all in his mind. But he has this vision of going to this valley where apparently there was a great battle, because the valley was strewn with dry bones, skeletons of, we're guessing, Israelite soldiers who had died in battle. And now they're all laid there, and they've been picked clean, and it's just dry bones. And Ezekiel experiences God asking this question, Ezekiel, do you think these bones can live? And Ezekiel says, only you know, God. And the voice says, speak to the bones and prophesy to them to come together to live. And so he does this, and all of a sudden these bones start to rattle, and they kind of get back together, and before you know it, they're attaching together just right, and skin is forming, and they're kind of left as zombies, they're just they're there, they've got flesh, but they're not really alive. And then the presence of God, says to Ezekiel again, I want you to speak breath, my breath, into these beings, these dead bones, whatever. And so Ezekiel does. And the wind blows and breathes into these formerly dead bone skeleton things, and they come alive with the breath of God. The Spirit of God brings life. The breath of God, the wind of God brings life. It's powerful stuff. So we fast forward several hundred years, and now Jesus is on the scene, and you kind of know my take on things. I think that something profound happened to Jesus later in his life when he was somewhere around 34 to 36 years old, and it changed his trajectory. He was just some kind of lowly carpenter before this thing happened, and all four Gospels record it at his baptism, this spiritual experience. And he experiences the presence of God descending on him like a dove. What does that even mean? It's peace, it's a symbol of shalom perhaps, but it's this weird experience that had to have leveled Jesus, because all four Gospels say as soon as this weird thing happens, he heads to the hills. He needs a good solid camping trip to sort things out, like most people do. So he's up there, and when he comes back, he's a different guy. He's got a different agenda. Maybe he picks up some side gigs here and there doing some carpentry. Who knows? But mostly he becomes an itinerant preacher, and he's going around his area, and he's teaching at a level that is more profound than anybody ever could have imagined he could. He seems to be like this conduit of the presence and spirit of God in powerful ways, able to heal where apparently he could not before, but now, because he's so dialed in or so immersed in the Spirit of God, or the Spirit of God is so immersed itself on him, that crazy things can happen. And so he's renowned as this miracle worker. They called it a magician. And he invited others to follow him, that they would learn his ways, what this was all about, what it meant. Because I think what he realized is this wasn't just for him. Well, the word got out about him, and this Jewish leader who was highly educated named Nicodemus, he was part of kind of like the Supreme Court of ancient Israel. It's called the Sanhedrin. And it was a group of highly educated leaders that looked over all things Jewish in that day and time. Nicodemus went to Jesus under cover of night to find out what was really going on here. And Jesus makes this crazy statement about, you got to be born again to really get this thing. In other words, you got to have new eyes, new way of thinking. Something's got to happen to you to get you out of the way you've been thinking and realize more is going on here. And the guy's confused. He doesn't understand the metaphor. He's not getting it. And Jesus says, look, you should know this born again thing makes sense, because the wind blows wherever it's going to blow. And you've got to be in this flow of the wind. We don't know exactly where it's coming from. We don't know where it's going. But that's the way the Spirit works. He uses a metaphor of wind to talk about the Spirit of God. Later on in his ministry, Jesus spending some quiet time alone. One of the things he did is he focused on connecting with God personally, which is why we recommend doing personal contemplation, meditation in your life, because Jesus did it, and it was an important part of his life. Well, while he's doing this, the guys get in their fishing boat and they're headed to the other side of the shoreline. And so Jesus says, I'll catch up with you. Well, the wind picks up while these guys are out on the boat, and they're starting to really work against this wind, and it's pretty rough. And before you know it, they look to the back of the boat, and here comes this, what they think is a ghost walking on the water. Again, grain of salt. Are we supposed to take this thing totally literally? Are we just supposed to see the metaphor? I recommend for the meaning, let's just look at metaphor, right? Don't get all caught up in the literalness here and miss the bigger point that metaphor is trying to tell us. So in this scene, in this story, you've got Jesus walking on water. And Peter says, hey, if that's really you, command me, which is a statement of faith, command me to come out and join you on the water. So Jesus takes him up on it. Come on out. So Peter steps out of the boat. Man, how trippy would this be? Play along, right? Gets out of the boat and starts walking toward Jesus. But then he becomes afraid. And the curious thing to me about this is, what made Peter afraid? The writers of the scriptures were intentional about how they wrote. It may reflect their time and history, all the things that they said and the fingerprints all over it, but they were intentional. And the way the writer of the Gospel of Matthew wrote it was that Peter saw the wind and became afraid. And he started to sink, calls out for Jesus. Jesus holds him up by the hand, takes him to the boat, puts him in. He says, why'd you have such little faith? Could it be that one of the things we might need to see here is that Peter was experiencing this power of the Holy Spirit in a way that he never had. And when he saw it in its newness and its grandness and its power, it was terrifying. Jesus, on the other hand, had been living in this flow for a while. This was not new and scary anymore, as amazing as it surely must have been. I wonder if this was just the first time that Peter experienced anything like this, which would be important because another moment's coming up after Jesus had died. So the next thing I want to talk about is the story of Pentecost. Jesus has gone. He told the disciples to hang out in Jerusalem until this thing happens, and they're not exactly sure what that is. They're all in Jerusalem for the Feast of Pentecost, which is a Jewish feast that predated how we understood it in a Christian lens, and is a huge feast, a time when God spoke the law for the people. So you have this tie-in, you're kind of setting us up for God spoke in history at this moment and giving us the Ten Commandments and the law. So they're gathered together, maybe in the same upper room they had the very first communion. We don't know. But all of a sudden, this thing happens. And what is the thing that happens? They heard the wind. It doesn't necessarily mean wind happened, but they heard the sound of the wind, a fierce, strong wind around them, all around them. If you've ever been in seriously strong winds, it's loud. It's incredibly loud. And this is happening in this upper room. And also at the same time, there are these little tongues of fire that show up on everybody, on people. And people start to speak in languages that they didn't know how to speak before. All of this together is communicating in a massive way that they are all experiencing this major mystical experience of the Holy Spirit. What do we got here? We got the sound of wind. We have tongues of fire as they are speaking in new languages. All of this is to suggest that the presence of God, the wind, the breath, the Spirit of God showed up in a very powerful way. People before this, certainly had mystical experiences, and people after this have had these kinds of experiences where they will claim that they have had these windy moments in their life and been around for forever. And in fact, some church historians take note that until science started to screw things up for everybody, which I'm kind of saying that tongue in cheek, until science screwed everything up and started to, take away some of our wonderful mystical thinking about, is the sun revolving around us or the other way around, and all these things and weather patterns and all this stuff, which we all thought we were just living this wonderful mystical magic experience of life. And all these things were happening because God was willing them to happen. And it was this wonderful, whimsical kind of experience. So lots of people, when crazy stuff would happen, they'd be totally cool with it because they're like, yeah, all of life is this big, massive, mystical event. And then science came in and started explaining things. And we found out that not everything was this whimsical, magical event by definition because they could be understood scientifically. That started to slowly eradicate people's understanding and appreciation of the windiness of God and these windy experiences. So much so that by the time you get into, for sure, even in increased ways in the last few hundred years since the scientific revolution and up till now, a lot of people just dismiss this stuff. And when they think or hear about such experiences, they're just like, oh, who knows? You can't prove it. And so maybe we should just dismiss it. That's a common thought. And I wonder if you've had that thought before. If you've had something happen to you, maybe it's your white moth moment like me. And there's a party that's like, wow, that's meaningful to me. But then you talk yourself out of it at a later time. It's like, oh, you dope. It was just a white moth floating by. It has no idea that you even exist. It's just looking for, some food and the flowers and stuff. So, okay. But I have to tell you that there's this problem with the scientific revolution. And it's this. that not everything can be figured out, at least not yet. Not everything can be fully boiled down to reason. Not yet. Which is to suggest that maybe there is going to come a time when maybe with quantum physics and what they're discovering, because there's some real woo-woo stuff going on with quantum physics. Einstein, when he started to realize that there were weird things going on, like with particles of an atom, that if you mess with one and make it go clockwise, wherever the other half is, it goes counterclockwise. And it doesn't matter how far apart you split these things, they do it at exactly the same time. He called it spooky. Einstein called it spooky. So could it be that at some point quantum physics will explain everything, and maybe we'll realize that in a scientific way that we are a part of this magic, amazing, massive web of energy, and that because we are all connected in this massive web of energy, everything we do affects everything else and vice versa. Our lives matter because they're connected to the whole, and they're influencing for good or bad all the way through. Maybe that day will come and we'll pull back the veil and be like, oh, there wasn't a God after all. It was just this massive web of energy. And to that I would say, really? Really? Could it be that our ancient forebears in the faith, when they thought about God, they were just doing the best they could, and they were quite profound in their thinking, intuiting things that now quantum physics is suggesting has always been the case? Could it be that when our Jewish ancestors' favorite name they chose was Yahweh, which is, I am what I am, and further, I am what I was, I am what I am now, and I am what I will be forever. This flow, that it's more of a flow. It's like wind, like a river. Like maybe they were just doing the best they could and they had no other explanation, no other word for what they were saying except this is how we're calling this thing that we call God, because we have no other language for it. We're going to call it Yahweh, and other times we're going to call it Adonai Elohim, Lord God, which is profound in itself about the ever-changing God responding to creation at all moments, and yet the essence of God remaining the same, steadfast and true. Could it be that as we grow in our understanding of everything, we don't have to lose faith at all, but perhaps our faith can actually set us up, open us up to a greater possibility than our current understanding can? And maybe because we've already been walking in these windy ways, we will be able to speak truth to a culture and a time who are wondering, what do we do with these realities that we have come to discover? How do we interact with the flow? What is the flow all about? What is this energy stuff going on, if that's what it becomes? And what can we say to them? We can say that from experience of the last many thousands of years, there is this golden thread that has gone through it all, saying there is a Yahweh who is the very breath of our being, who is the origin of everything, the genesis of all creation, and that our ancestors in the past in the faith have recognized that the being behind this, the essence of this thing that is, this thisness, is very, very good, whose mercies are new every morning, whose desire is to see us live even after we've been dead, metaphorically in our lives, so that when we go through terrible grief or terrible hardship, it is not the end of our story, but there is a new day, a new hope, because God, Yahweh, Spirit, wind, breath, is good. That's hopeful. That's hopeful. And it's here for all of us. And I'm wondering if wherever you are on the map on this, I wonder if you can embrace this. And I'll say too, just a final little piece on this, we need both. We need reason. We need to be able to understand things with intelligence. We need to seek each other out to get wisdom on what we're experiencing. The Proverbs, the book of Proverbs, which is a book of Proverbs, wisdom sayings, many times it says, when you're going alone, you're in trouble. But there is wisdom in the counsel of many. Sometimes they say there is safety in the counsel of many. It's the same thing. And so some of us, we're having these windy experiences. We're just so sure that this is what God is saying to us in this moment. But we need to ask others, hey, what are you seeing here? Does this jibe with who we know God to be? Does this make sense in shalom, this thing that I'm experiencing right now? Because sometimes our community of faith can come around us and hear what we're saying and appreciate the windy tale that we're sharing and say, we respect that you've had an experience that has been profound. But I wonder if maybe your interpretation of what's happened and what may be continuing happening is shaped by more than just the Spirit of God. By the way, clue, your experience is always shaped by more than just the Spirit of God. As holy and as pure as you think you are, it is not possible. It is not possible for you to have such a pure experience of God as to not have anything else that's formed you in your life get in the way. We need the counsel of many to help buffer us so that we don't go do crazy things. Because crazy things have been done in the past that caused many, many lives. We don't want that. So if you're that person who you love to hear me talk and validate these windy experiences, awesome. I'm glad that it's affirming to you. But hear the wind of the Spirit. The wind of the Spirit is saying, wisdom is in the counsel of many. And for those of you who have no room for this woo-woo stuff, it sounds like nonsense to you. You hear me talk about mystical experience, you're like, yeah, it never happened to me, so I don't even know what to make of it, so I'm just not going to believe any of it, and blah, blah, blah. And you discount and dismiss other people's very powerful mystical experiences. You're entitled to do that, but what I would suggest to you is that you are then the one who is going against all those thousands of years of history. Are you so profoundly wise? Are you that smart that you can even outdo the greatest minds of our world today to say you haven't figured out that there's no room? Maybe you don't want to call it God, fine. But there's other things happening that we fully don't appreciate. And what do you do with that? Well, how about this? If you have a real hard time believing in this Ruach Pneuma, Spirit, breath, wind of God, I bet you believe in love. I bet you agree that love would be a good thing for people to have in their life and a good thing for us to sow in the world. Or maybe it's shalom for you. I'm not sure. You take your pick on that. But I'll tell you that they're about the same thing. And I bet if you meditate and focus on what it means to be a person of love, with time and reflection, and with the wisdom of others, I bet you will become a more loving person. In fact, I will imagine that there's going to be a moment in your life, maybe many moments in your life, where in your meditation on love, that you are going to be inspired in some way to think differently about a thing. Maybe it's going to soften your heart towards somebody who's wronged you, and you're going to have a capacity to forgive that you didn't think you ever could. Or you never even thought to even consider grace for that person. But love inspired you. Well, at the end of the day, does it make any difference what we call the source of that inspiration? If the inspiration continues to flow, and it continues to flow from the direction of love and shalom to the direction of love and shalom, let's get on board with that. May you have wind in your sails. May you recognize that this strong wind that has been prevailing from the very beginning of everything is worthy of tying into, that can be harnessed for so much good, that can lead us to so many amazing spaces. And as you have difficulty getting your brain around it, may you just stop. May you get rid of the noise. And may you just be still enough to hear your one solitary breath in and out. And may you know that the Spirit of God is with you and in you. And before you. I want to give you some quiet for just a few moments to just breathe, to let some of this filter down, and then we'll close together with the Lord's Prayer. Take a moment to yourself and enjoy the sound of silence. I hope during that time of silence that you have felt loved, hopeful, held, strengthened, supported, all the things that come with shalom, because it's with you. This thing that we call God that we can't help but to put human characteristics onto, but at the end of the day is Yahweh. I am this thing that was, this thing that is now, and will forever be, and it's good. I hope you'll know that you have been touched not just once, but you will be forever. This presence is with you, even as we grapple between reason and experience. Know that the winds prevail nonetheless. Jesus taught us a prayer to pray so that we might be further tied in with this presence of God. And I invite you to gaze to the screen now, and let's pray this prayer together, a rendition of the Lord's Prayer by Philip Newell. Let's do it together. Ground of all being, Mother of life, Father of the universe, your name is sacred beyond speaking. May we know your presence. May your longings be our longings in heart and action. May there be food for the human family today and for the whole earth community. Forgive us the falseness of what we have done as we forgive those who are untrue to us. Do not forsake us in our time of conflict, but lead us into new beginnings. For the light of life, the vitality of life, and the glory of life are yours now and forever. Amen. I hope you have a great day. Hope you have a great week. I'll be back with you next Sunday. Thanks. See you next week.